Welcome to the Law School Toolbox podcast. Today we're talking about COVID-19 and the potential impacts on future 1Ls. Your Law School Toolbox hosts are Alison Monahan and Lee Burgess. That's me. We're here to demystify the law school and early legal career experience so you'll be the best law student and lawyer you can be. We're the co-creators of the Law School Toolbox, the Bar Exam Toolbox, and the career-related website Career Dicta. Alison also runs the Girls Guide to Law School. If you enjoy the show, please leave a review on your favorite listening app. And if you have any questions, don't hesitate to reach out to us. You can reach us via the contact form on lawschooltoolbox.com, and we'd love to hear from you. And with that, let's get started.
Welcome back to the Law School Toolbox podcast. Today, we're talking about how potential 1Ls can think about their options around whether to even start law school in the fall, given the current uncertainty. Well, this is a hard decision.
Oh my gosh, yeah. My heart goes out to everyone who's trying to plan big changes for the fall because There's just so much uncertainty even about the next week, let alone 6 months from now. It's just, I know everybody's rescheduling weddings and there's all this question about, graduations and all of this stuff. It's incredibly difficult, let alone like a life-changing decision that's a very expensive one, like starting law school.
Yeah, I think, we're just dealing with incredibly high uncertainty around all kinds of things. And I think that makes it very difficult to figure out what to do here. Is the school that you're thinking about even going to be open? Are they going to be having classes in person? Are they going to be doing something else? And I think the other factor here is you have to think about the job market. We're in such an uncertain economic situation. What is that going to look like for you, after your first year for a summer job or second year or third year, what are you walking into here?
Yeah, I think that's very true. Although typically recessions are a time where a lot of people go back to school. I think This is a unique economic slowdown that may be very different than what we've seen before. We just don't know. Nobody knows because nobody's back to work.
Right, exactly. And I read this morning that the unemployment numbers are exponentially high. Well, not exponentially higher, but higher than 2 years of job losses in the last recession have happened in the last 3 weeks. So I think we're in pretty uncharted territory here.
Yeah.
So let's take these one by one. Because I think the most obvious question is just this uncertainty around classes and whether schools are even going to reopen as they normally would in what might seem like a far off world, but is actually only a few months from now.
Right. And I think a lot of this seems to be regional. I think right now we should probably note that it is April 9th when we're talking about this because we now have to date everything because it's all about what you know today. So today is April 9th. But right now in April, California is seeing a lot less kind of destruction than someplace like New York. But New York City has tons of law schools. So if I was a incoming 1L in New York, in New York City, and I was questioning, should I move and relocate to New York City? Are these New York City schools going to be able to house me? Are they going to be able to hold classes? Who knows? But in California, things are not necessarily as dire now, but they're saying that things could peak in June. Well, if you're trying to move to law school in August, what is August going to look like? So some of it's going to be, I think, regional, and some of it I think we may not know until right before because the world seems to change every single day.
Right. Well, that was one of the things I was thinking about when we were talking about this topic is when are schools actually going to be making these decisions? And can you really count on that date? What are they really committing to? So, for example, with the bar exam right now, a lot of states are saying, we don't think we're going to be able to do it in July, but September seems possible. So we'll just postpone until September. Is that really going to be a different option? I don't know. So even if your school says okay, we're going to decide on May 1st what we're going to do or June 1st or whatever, what are they even really committing to and what can they commit to? It's not clear.
It's so true. Yeah, it's very unclear. And I think, right now there's a lot of uncertainty about the bar exam. And I think we're having the same kind of debate in the bar world. Some places are making decisions, some places are not. Some states are saying we can't make decisions. We'll make decisions later. But here's, and you're just kind of like, okay, people are supposed to plan for the future. There's so many unknowns here. And the law schools are part of these huge bureaucracies.
Right.
And how does that all play into this?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of law schools are part of much larger universities. And I have read that, I mean, if you think about opening a college again or university with 20,000, 30,000, 40,000 students, I mean, some of these places are huge. I mean, all those people living in a dorm, that seems really difficult in a few months. Is it going to be possible that the law school, which is much smaller and maybe they're not providing housing and the students aren't as concentrated where they're living, can they reopen if the bigger university doesn't? I mean, I don't know the answer to that.
Yeah, and I don't think anyone knows the answer to that.
Right.
I think that's what's so challenging. And I don't know how the schools are going to make these decisions.
Right. When I say reopen, I mean reopen in person. Obviously, they're probably going to keep doing their online thing that they're doing now. We can talk later about, whether you want to start law school with that. But yeah, I mean, I think we're in very uncharted waters. I would be feeling very uncertain if I had to make this. I mean, I went to Columbia, like that's literally in the middle of New York City. It's like, would I do that this year? I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know, because they're saying that there could be another wave of this in the fall, and then we could be back to social distancing pretty quickly, or worse. I mean, in Europe, they have now prohibited people from exercising. Like it's, things are really intense in a lot of places, and I'm not sure, how this is all going to shake out.
Yeah, and I think you have to keep in mind too that universities were really some of the first places to take those steps and close down. I mean, they understand the problem here. So, I don't think universities, including law schools, are going to be out in front of the curve in terms of letting people come back on campus and live there permanently before this is resolved in some way or another.
Yeah, because one of the things that I think they really saw that was so disruptive was, a lot of students had no home to go back to.
Right.
They told everyone to leave. And then it was like, but where are some of these people supposed to go home to live with their parents if their parents have room? A lot of people were living in student-sponsored housing or, some sort of, temporary state. And I think that is one of the real risks that people need to start thinking about is if you have an acceptance letter for a school and you're planning on going somewhere, I would call and start asking a lot of questions about how they've handled the situation too, because if this happens again, I think you want to know what the protocol was and how it played out this last time.
Yeah, I think you definitely want to talk to current students and just kind of hear from them how they feel about what the choices that their schools have made. I mean, obviously everyone is making difficult choices, but I feel like some schools probably have handled this better than others. Yeah, I think the housing thing is so important if you're going to be moving. I mean, how late can you wait to sign a lease? What if also I guess people have to decide, would you start school if it's online? And if the answer to that is yes, then I think you have a little more flexibility. If the answer is no, then I think you really have to see, can you put off paying that deposit? I know a lot of undergraduate schools are doing that. They're extending their deposit deadlines. Or can you put off signing a lease, but then does that put you in a position where you're not going to be able to find housing?
Right.
And also around housing, is the school going to refund your money if you have to leave? Because I understand they didn't necessarily do that in the current situation.
Right. Yeah. And also, what is your financial aid going to look like? Or what if this turns out to be a remote learning situation? Are you still taking out tons of loans? Is your debt load going to be the same? I mean, there's really a lot of open questions. And I think that the schools need to make a decision and provide clarity for everybody's benefit. I think it's just when that's going to happen. But most people by April, if you're going to school in the fall, you've pretty much decided. You're starting to make plans. Maybe you've given notice, to your job. You never know. Some people, are already starting to make those plans. So it is a moment to maybe press pause on all of that until we get more information. And hopefully the schools will start making decisions, I would hope before the end of the semester. But, most law schools are going to finish up exams in May, and then they're going to be able to see how this all shook out. But they got to tell people soon. And if they aren't telling you, then you need to start asking questions. Or asking for things, asking for a delayed deposit, asking for, allowances, because you deserve it. This is an unprecedented situation and everybody deserves additional flexibility.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think one key issue here is that law school classes just aren't really set up to be lectures the way that a lot of undergraduate classes are. And it's really hard, I would imagine, to do a Socratic dialogue where the professor is asking questions and the students are answering on video. So I think law schools are even more impacted by this online situation than an average class would be.
Yeah, I'm a member of a nonprofit board, and we were having a board meeting via Zoom, and there were only 9 people on that meeting, and I was losing it, because somebody's delayed, and then the video freezes, and then people are talking over each other, and it is really hard. I mean, I know that everybody's championing like Zoom happy hours and all that stuff.
I went to one. It was horrible.
You didn't like it?
Well, it was the same thing. It was just like, 10 people sitting there and everyone's trying to talk a little bit at once and you can't tell who's talking and the Zoom's flipping back and forth between the video. It got better once someone decided like, okay, this is ridiculous. We should just have everyone talk about one topic that's not related to this virus. And then it was interesting. It was just one person talking. But I think to have a conversation with multiple people is really challenging.
Yeah, I mean, it's not easy. And I think that there's a lot of, championing how these technology tools are allowing us to connect during this time of social distancing. And, thank goodness. On the other hand, though, it is an imperfect technology and it depends on everybody's Wi-Fi speed and a lot of different things. Also, everybody's comfort level with, doing things on the screen, and a professor, like, it's very different to even like take a sales call or do some of the work that you and I do in this electronic format, even when the situation isn't perfect. But I'm going to go give a talk to a undergrad class in a couple of weeks. And then I started to be like, okay, where's the best Wi-Fi? Where's the good lighting? Where can I set up my computer so it's not like looking up my nose, like all of those different things.
Right.
And it just becomes much more complicated. And the schools are not set up to work in this way. And the professors, many of whom are not used to working in this way, there's going to be a big learning curve. And I think students have to ask themselves if it's going to be a digital first semester 1L year or even an entire 1L year, is that what you want your 1L year to be like? And I don't think there's a right answer to that, but you have to at least ask yourself that question.
Right. And is that what you want to pay for at full price?
Yeah, if that's what the schools are if the schools are still charging full price, is that, and are they planning on staying pass fail? I think for a lot of students, we have another episode where we talk about the benefits of pass fail, but or I guess the mixed bag of pass fail, and the implications. But I think for a 1L, there are another level of implications, because those are the grades that are supposed to feed into your job opportunities. And so if they say, well, we can do these classes remote, but we're going to stay in this pass fail model, I think then students have to make sure that they understand what the implications are of that. That's not to mean that that's not the right thing for the schools to do in a chaotic situation, but there are going to be ramifications for that too.
Right. Yeah. And I mean, the reality is part of going to law school is who you meet. And
True.
This might be massively curtailed if you have a virtual orientation and you may not meet your classmates and professors for months. I mean, I was thinking about this in the context of, certainly law schools and other professional schools, a lot of them do these kind of professional remote learning type of situations. But even there, people come together for 2 weeks and go to classes maybe twice a year or something like that. So, if you take out all of that, then I think it gets, just increasingly hard to see how are you even going to meet your classmates, really.
Yeah, it's hard. I have some friends who are in the middle of MBA programs or executive MBA programs that have now all switched to virtual. And a lot of them were asking, is it even worth it? Because in an MBA program, I think that social element is even more intense than in the law school space. And then I think, the few friends I have are close to graduating. They're like, well, I might as well just finish at this point. I mean, I've gotten what I can out of it, because we don't know what's going to come next.
Yeah, I know someone I know who's a Harvard MBA said that the same conversation was happening among like current students of like in the second years, they're like, well, whatever, we'll just graduate. But if you're a first year MBA, it's like, well, how long is this going to go on? Like, I'm paying a lot of money for this. What am I getting out of it?
Right.
I think law school, that's less, but I think it's still a huge factor.
Yeah. One other thing I think students need to consider is if they are going to be responsible for children, or if they are breadwinners in their household, or if they have parents that they're responsible for, it just may not be practical to be taking online classes at home full time and also managing children who may or may not be in school and possibly needing to have a part-time job to help contribute to the family. I mean, there are a lot of factors going on. So one thing that some folks may want to reach out to their school about is this idea that they could go part-time. Maybe if the part-time program is up and running, they can take a couple of classes that first semester remotely, but then if things resolve in 2021, they can go back to school in person, maybe go back to a full-time schedule. I think there might be some alternatives available to students that wouldn't exist in the real world or the normal world. Right. The only way you're going to learn about those is ask questions, and it may be that the law schools haven't even considered some of these things. So you're going to have to ask questions to get them to consider it.
Right. No, I think that's right. I'm actually suddenly curious about what Michigan is doing with their summer start program. We'll go look that up.
Yeah. It's a good point. I hadn't thought about that.
I should have looked that one up. I hadn't either until right now. But no, I think that's right. I mean, I think this is a time to be sort of flexible and think about different options. Everyone is doing that. So you've got to kind of think about what your life looks like and what would actually work for you, and to be realistic. 'Cause I don't think there's any benefit in someone starting in a situation that is basically setting themselves up to be in an impossible situation and then not succeeding. Like, in my opinion, you're better off deferring for a year, which typically schools will let you do very easily, and I'm sure would probably let you do in this scenario, and wait until your kids are back in school or whatever it is before you start to try to take this on. There's no point in setting yourself up for failure here just because you've decided that this was something that you were going to do right now.
Yeah. And this is an unprecedented situation where everybody is having to pivot. I don't know anyone whose business or school life or anything hasn't been affected. It's affecting everyone. So this is a time to get creative, but I think also to have a lot of compassion that we are going through something that most of us have never gone through before, and our community has never gone through before, and our schools have never gone through before. And even schools who did a lot of disaster planning did not disaster plan to this extent. I've heard about schools who have had, distance learning plans where it's, if the school is closed for more than 3 days, we have a distance learning, but that's different than like distance learning for semesters. That's just...
Right. I mean, even something like an earthquake is like, all right, the earthquake happens, things are bad, and then you deal with it. Whereas here we're in this condition of ongoing uncertainty with no clear end date. So I think it's just very difficult for people to make decisions based on any sort of future information when, like you said, like the information may be changing daily.
Yeah. And I think that, one of the things I have to keep reminding myself of, and I think anyone trying to make decisions around this time will have to remind them of, is we do know this will end at some point. Life will return to a normal, whether it be a new normal or normal. We just don't know when that is. And I think I'm getting into that cycle where it can be hard to remember that this will end because it does seem like it's going on forever.
I always go back to well, the Black Death ended at some point. I mean, and, they had way less good science. So if that stopped basically on its own, this will eventually end.
Yeah,
I'm not saying that's uplifting.
Way to take it to the plague.
Yeah, well, I mean, we basically are in a plague situation. This is very medieval.
It's somewhat medieval, with a zoom, but. Yeah, I think it is important.
But it's like fundamentally the same
thing. It is fundamentally, you're right. It is fundamentally the same thing. I think that knowing it will end, though, eventually, I think can help you decide, if you just really don't want to be part of this educational experiment, which is moving all of these schools into an online forum, then delay. It's 1 year. It could be 1 year of your life. Maybe you can spend that year doing something else. I think that becomes the question is, what do you do if you delay?
Right. Well, that's what we were talking about before. We're like, oh, you could just defer. And you're like, well, what if you just got laid off? We're like, oh yeah, that's a good point. And I guess you can't really job hunt right now. So I don't know what people do in that year. They're deferring. You can't really go abroad and volunteer or whatever those things would be that people would.
Right. They sent everyone home from the Peace Corps. I think, this isn't a time to travel. This isn't a time to do a lot of the things that folks do. There may be, plenty of opportunities for volunteer work I know almost every nonprofit is going to be in a crisis, and I'm sure would love people to work for free, but I think that that's not a viable option for a lot of people.
Yeah. Yes. I mean, I think, in terms of, what suggestions do we have? I think thinking about your backup plan and does it make sense for you to defer? If you are in a job that for whatever reason is currently stable and you feel like that job is likely to continue, then I would say there's a pretty strong argument for deferring for a year. If you're not in that scenario, then, maybe doing law school is a better option than sitting around your house with no income and doing nothing.
Yeah, it's really hard, but it is a time to sit down and I think start looking through scenarios and seeing what answers you need to be able to make these choices. So, start making lists and then start going to the school and asking questions.
Right. And, if classes are going to be completely virtual, like, do you even move to that area immediately or do you wait?
Right. It's really hard to know. The other thing that I think that folks should also consider is whether or not this changes waitlist situations. A lot of people are sometimes waiting to hear from higher ranked schools. This could be interesting if you're right on that cusp to see what happens, because I think a lot of people might decide not to go. So if you're trying to kind of get off a wait list or try and get into a different school, this could be an interesting opportunity. I don't even know, using the word opportunity at a time like this feels very bizarre, but it is going to be a shakeup and it'll be interesting to see where everyone ends up.
Right. Yeah. I think if you are, for whatever reason, 100% committed to going to law school, come hell or high water, and you will start virtually if you have to, and you will do whatever it takes to make that happen, then if you are on a wait list, let that school know. I'm sure if they're looking for people to pluck off the wait list, they're going to go for hey, Lee called me and said she is 100% in if we admit her. All right, let's take her.
Yeah, exactly.
Because I think that, it's going to have value. It's going to have value to the schools. They're looking to fill classes. They're going to have a serious problem. I think a lot of places filling the class this year, which I guess brings us to another question. I think one thing people should think about is the school actually in danger of closing?
Yeah.
There are a lot of law schools that have kind of been limping along for a while. I mean, a few of them have closed. But you want to be really sure that the school that you're committing to is not in that scenario.
Yeah. I mean, it's a huge danger, really. And I think also I would look at the financial health or the schools that are at risk of losing their accreditation. I know in California that's been a big thing, that maybe those schools should not. Maybe that's not where you put your eggs in that basket right now, because we have already seen schools struggle, with the down tick, and some schools threatening to close or almost closing and not closing. I just don't think it's a great time to gamble on a school that doesn't have a lot of resources. I think this is one of those times where a school that's got a great endowment or is connected to a university that's very stable and has a reputation and has stable alumni, I mean, that's who sees you through, because the schools are going to put their hands out and ask for money to solve these problems, and if they're already having financial troubles, not a great time to invest.
Yeah, because you have to imagine anyone who had money in the stock market is has a lot less money than they did. I think you just want to be cognizant of, like you said, that you're going to a well-resourced organization that has the bandwidth to survive this, because I don't think everyone is going to survive.
No. We have been talking a lot about, different businesses, and this really kind of showing who had a disaster plan, who had money in the bank, who had kind of a depth of resources to pull from. We had to sit down with our own bucks and have an honest conversation about that. Luckily we are very conservative people, so that helps. But, but not every organization is like that.
And we already had a virtual business.
So we didn't have to shift our business model. But I think that, the schools are the same thing. You're going to see, which deans are able to pivot, which faculty are, willing to use technology. I think there's a lot of, there's going to be a lot of new information, and you should try and get as much as you can, read about what people are writing about the different schools, and, see what people are saying about how it's being handled.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you want to pay attention to the news. I think you want to reach out to current students. I think you want to ask hard questions and be skeptical of the answers. I mean, this is not the time to just sort of take on face value from a school, oh yeah, everything's going to be great. We're sure it'll be fine, because you don't want to be in a scenario a year or two in when it's not fine and suddenly you're having to, scramble to try to transfer to a school that's going to accept your credits. Like, that does not make sense. Do not do that.
Right. Absolutely. I mean, you just have to be very cautious. Also, if the word comes out that people are dropping their acceptances and they're not going, it could also, if you are an attractive applicant, be a time to go try and ask for more money. Like, make this attractive to them
absolutely.
to grab you. So if you are between two schools and you get off a wait list, go try and get scholarship money. This is a great time not to incur debt. So,
right.
Exactly. And so if a school is in a position to offer you money because they want to fill those classes, ask for it. I don't think that's an inappropriate thing to do at this time. I think it's a smart business thing to do, especially in light of a possibly uncertain job market.
Right. And I think, it's particularly the case if your circumstances have changed since you filed your FAFSA, somebody in your family who's going to help pay for this has lost a job, you've lost a job, your savings are down, any of these things. I mean, essentially law school is a business decision. And I think treating it like that is a smart move right now because, like you said, the job market, which we've got other podcasts on and we're continuing to talk about, but, it's kind of in free fall right now and people don't really know what's going to happen. And if nothing else, we know that for the next year, big law hiring has been pushed off by, for a semester. I'm guessing that may continue for reasons we've talked about on a different podcast you can listen to. But, there's just a lot of uncertainty. And if you, thought you were going to get that job your second summer that's paying you a lot of money and now that job is more uncertain, then of course, as a financial decision, this starts to be like, a little more questionable. So, I think there's no harm in kind of pushing schools a little bit on this and saying, look, I want to do this, but you've got to make this make sense for me.
Yeah. I mean, this is their problem too, and
right. I mean, they want to have students.
They want to have students. They want to keep their faculty employed. The faculty want to keep their jobs. They want to keep this machine going. So they're going to have to pivot and, like any good kind of business, make smart decisions. And, you should make sure that this is the best decision for you. I really think this is a time, we always talk about worrying about taking on huge amounts of debt. With an uncertain economy and an uncertain job market, I think debt load is something that everybody really needs to be thoughtful about. We don't know what's coming down the pipeline. We don't know how long it's going to take to recover. I have the luck of always graduating from school during like an economic crash. So like graduated from college in 2001, graduated from law school in 2008. Like, it's not fun. So there are like, jobs disappear, money dries up. You find yourself doing all sorts of jobs that you hadn't planned on doing. There are economic realities to that. And if you haven't lived through one of those job markets, talk to some people who did, because it's a different world than maybe it felt like, I don't know, like 4 weeks ago. How long have we been at this now? I don't know. It feels like a year.
I don't know. Certainly we could say January, I think. Okay. Like when we were all celebrating the new decade and it was 2020 and it was a new decade and it was going to be so great. And we're all making our freaking vision boards. Because I feel like my vision board now has big X's across everything on it. Not that I'm bitter about that, but I'm like...
I was talking to my therapist about how this was going to be the year, for all these goals.
Yeah. Yeah, no, now we're just like, wow, no more vision board. All right, next.
I know. I saw a great meme that was like, I called my therapist and started screaming, "You told me that I was overreacting by always planning for the worst case scenario situation. Well, here we are." And they're like, good point. Good point.
Yeah, like you were probably underreacting.
I know.
Yeah, I mean, I think one other point is if you do decide to do this, you need to do well. You need to make sure that you're in a position where you can set yourself up for success so that, I mean, there are going to be some jobs. They're just going to be harder to get. So you need to be the one who's in that position to get those jobs. I mean, that sounds harsh, but that's just, again, that's the financial reality is not everyone is going to get that job.
No, and depending on how recruiting and things like that shake out and how long kind of this distancing goes on, it's possible that how you look on paper is going to become more and more important, because they may not be able to do as many in-person things. And so that's another thing you want to think about. You not only do well, but like, how can you set yourself up so your resume stands out? How are you going to be able to build relationships with professors? How are you going to,
Right.
I mean, this is complicated, but it's going to be a different ballgame, and you need to make sure that the choices you're making are going to make you an attractive applicant in the way that they're going to be able to judge applicants.
Right, which is really going to come down probably even more to your transcript, which then may or may not have grades on it. So these are all questions that you need to ask and really think about. I think people just really need to be realistic and not, I can see someone being in a scenario where like, well, things are not looking great for my job, or, I'm not happy, blah, blah, blah. Like maybe this is my big chance. I should just go grab that gold ring and everything will be fine. And I just think you can't do that right now. You really need to think through, what kind of debt am I taking on? What am I signing up for? What am I really signing up for in terms of classes and grades and, my school's positioning and all of this stuff? Because you want to make sure that when this does all settle, you end up looking back and saying, yeah, that was a solid decision. I really had thought about that. Not just, oh, I just took this because it seemed like maybe it would be better. I don't think you can do that right now.
The one other thing I think is important to note is that everyone's making the best decisions they can with the information that they have in the moment. So, as perfectionists, which a lot of potential law students are, I do think that there's this pressure of like, what is the perfect decision? What's the absolute right decision? And I think all you can do is collect information, make a decision that's the best decision you can make with the information that you have, and then execute your plan. Because we might have new information 2 months from now when decisions are already made. There's just no way to know.
Right. And I think part of what you're trying to do here is decrease the uncertainty. So, if you make this huge list of questions, many of which we probably brought up, and I'm sure you can think of other questions you would have, and then really start going down that list of like, okay, can I get information to actually answer some of these questions? Even if that answer maybe would change, but like, is there an answer right now? And then at some point you have to make your decision. And start executing on it and hope for the best. I mean, there's no going backwards in time, unfortunately. If there was, we might be doing some things differently as a world. We can't go backwards to January and take everything more seriously.
Exactly. So I know that we're running out of time, but I think that my final thoughts on this are it's time to start making lists of questions, start reaching out to schools that you have on a wait list, start talking to your family, start being very practical and not optimistic, like running, you can run a few different scenarios. And I had a friend who was telling me how her business set up their kind of disaster response. And they kind of do it in a staged approach, like a lot of the governments did. But I think it's not a bad way to think about it. It's like, okay, well, if the world stays kind of as is, this is kind of my decision point. But if things get weirder, then my decisions might change. Or if things get even weirder, then my decisions might change. So it's like, well, if my job is stable, this is where we are right now. I think maybe I shouldn't go back to school if that happens. But then maybe this next step is I lose my job, like such and such, and other things happen. Now I know what decision to make. So you can almost kind of create these different scenarios for yourself and give you kind of ways you can make decisions based on the state of the world as we think it might be coming down the pipes. So, that's another way to think about this is if you feel like you can't make all your decisions now, just collect as much information you can, give yourself some framework for making these decisions. So when the deadlines do come, that you have the ability to quickly make decisions.
Right. I mean, frankly, even if you pay that deposit and you decide you're going, you can just back out of that.
Yeah.
I mean, you will lose the deposit probably.
Do not.
But like that is, that.
Don't throw good money after bad money.
Yeah. That sunk cost amount versus like your entire future. Right. Like lose the deposit if you need to do that.
Because everybody's losing something, I think that kind of stuff, you try not to lose it, but who isn't losing money or who isn't losing something? These are just tumultuous times. That deposit may equal, the plane flights that everybody's canceled this summer or whatever it might be, it's just everybody's losing something. I wouldn't let a deposit stand in the way and cause you to incur a bunch more debt.
Right. If you make a deposit, say in June, and everything seems like it's going to move forward, and then by August, it's obvious that this is not going to move forward in the way that you expected, I think you pull out at that point, or you defer or you talk to them or whatever. But, you don't need to feel like just because you decided to do this in June that you have to do this in the fall.
Yeah. That being said, if you want to go forward and do it and you feel that the school is handling the situation in a good way and that you're in a position in life where it makes sense, go for it. Just know what you're getting into. That's all you need to know. Just be educated.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. All right.
Do as well as you can. Probably want to look at our Start Law School Right program.
That's true. That's true.
So that you can, it's totally virtual.
Totally virtual. Pandemic prepared.
Yeah. Pandemic ready. We've got it. We got you covered.
Yep.
Yeah.
All right.
Well,
I think we should be out of time at that point.
Yeah, I think we're getting a little punchy.
Yeah.
Yes, if you enjoyed this episode of the Law School Toolbox podcast, please take a second to leave a review and rating on your favorite listening app. We would really appreciate it. And be sure to subscribe so you don't miss anything. If you have any questions or comments, please don't hesitate to reach out to Lee or Allison at lee@lawschooltoolbox.com or allison@lawschooltoolbox.com. Or you can always contact us via our website contact form at lawschooltoolbox.com. Thanks for listening. We'll talk soon, and good luck making your decisions.